Salams from the People's Dispatch Studios in New Delhi. I'm Siddhantani and you're watching Daily Debrief. Today on the show, we're talking about another lawsuit against Facebook. We're talking about Philippines' anti-terror law, a party at 10 Downing Street, and finally remembering the first Intifada. First up, our good friends at the company formerly known as Facebook have been sued by Rohingya. Dozens of refugees living in the UK and the US have sued the social media giant for allowing hate speech against them to go unchecked. They're demanding more than 150 billion US dollars in compensation and saying that Facebook's platforms promoted violence against them. An estimated 10,000 Rohingya Muslims were killed during a military crackdown in Buddhist majority Myanmar in 2017. In the US, for example, the legal complaint accuses Facebook of being willing to trade, I quote here, willing to trade the lives of the Rohingya people for better market penetration in a small country in Southeast Asia, end quote. NewsClick's tech guru, Bapa Sinha, is with us. Bapa, good to have you back. What are the specifics of this particular suit, Bapa?
So this is fairly recent, right? 2-3 days back, the reports came that there were two simultaneous suits, coordinated suits, one in the UK and the other one in the US, which is filed on behalf of the victims of the Rohingya genocide in Myanmar. And the estimated value, they're asking for more than $150 billion in damages. The suits are claiming that Facebook, the US suit is a class action suit against Facebook, and that Facebook effectively knew about that its platform was being used to promote hate speech, which resulted in deaths of more than 10,000 Rohingyas in Myanmar. And in spite of knowing it, they did not do anything about it, right? So that's what the suits are about.
Okay. And so, like in a wider context, we've spoken often, especially in the context of Frances Haugen and her statements, of what is happening on social media, all of the social media companies in terms of hate speech. Give us a sense of what are some of the conversations that are being had in the industry, between industry and government, and how some of this is being looked at.
Right. So So just to go back, that this current suit is probably as a result of the Frances Haugen revelations, which came out in September or beginning of October, right? And Frances Haugen is a whistleblower who used to work in Facebook. She collected a lot of material from Facebook and then went public with it. Basically, her revelations are that Facebook, that Zuckerberg and the Facebook top leadership knew about widespread abuse of its platform in order to promote fake news and hate speech in country after country, right? This is not limited to Myanmar or one or two other countries. This is across the board, right? So they have seen in India, which is Facebook's biggest market, like in terms of number of subscribers, they just ignored hate speech by BJP, RSS sponsored hate speech. Similar things have happened in Europe, where neo-Nazi groups, which were banned by the German government, were organizing on Facebook. In fact, they were using Facebook as a platform to come together. They're selling merchandise in Germany, in Finland, neo-Nazi groups, white supremacist groups in US, in Canada. Ethiopia and Myanmar are obviously there. So this is widespread, right? And the bigger thing is that this is not that Facebook's defense is that it has grown too big and it's not unable to control all the speech that is going on in on its platform. But what the Haugen revelations clearly show is that they knew about it, right? And from the research tech community, it is now well understood that this is not a problem in this is not a bug in their platform, right? This is what their platform is supposed to do.
You can't just blame it on the algorithm.
These are not like algorithms which have gone crazy and done stuff, right? This is so Facebook's business model is it wants to sell ads. Now, in order to sell ads, they have to hook on people to be on their platform for the longest period of time, right? And now it's well established, right? There was a scientific study done by MIT, I think in 2018, where it was clear that hate speech, fake news, sensationalist news, it goes viral far more than regular stuff, right? And so people are more hooked on if you feed them things which are like which feed their inherent prejudices, which are sensationalist and polarizing. And Facebook knows this, right? And in spite of knowing this, Facebook is not willing to pull that content because that directly hurts Facebook's bottom line. It's as straightforward as that, right? So they are trading hate speech with their profits, and of course their profits take more priority than people's lives, apparently.
Yeah. We're moving on now to the Philippines, where there's some good news at least. The Supreme Court there has decided to strike down parts of the anti-terrorism law that human rights advocates were contesting on the grounds of being overbroad and therefore limiting the civil liberties of the people of the Philippines. Critics of the law and groups such as the National Union of People's Lawyers have called this decision a small victory for human rights. We're going to swap Bappa out for Anish now for more on that story. Anish, how long has this constitutional legal battle been going on, and how has it sort of progressed to this stage?
So this law, the Anti-Terrorism Act, was passed in middle of last year, in the middle of a raging pandemic, and they pushed through a law because they knew that social movements will not be out in the streets to protest at that point in time. But at the same time, so the legal battle has been going on ever since then, and they have been trying to get the whole act just struck down by the Constitutional Court. But it hasn't gone their way entirely. If you look at it, it's just taking down a qualifier and another provision, and it's not really,
the kind of broad changes, or like you're saying, complete striking down of the law, right?
Yeah, that did not happen.
Right. So what is the qualifier that has been removed, and what is this small victory for that these groups are saying it is?
So one of the qualifiers that they took out was part of the Section 4E, which pretty much allows for doesn't consider other democratic demonstrations as a terrorist act until and unless, and that is the qualifier, that unless it comes with an intention to harm or kill or threaten anybody.
Right.
And this includes like trade union strikes or demonstrations, political demonstrations, protest movements, stuff like that. This qualifier was always dangerous because the whole point of the law was that the intentionality of the accused will be pretty much decided by the the non kind of like extra constitutional actors that they're setting up, like the anti-terrorism cell, the NTF-LCAC. They are the ones who will be pretty much deciding who is or isn't terrorist, and how, and that is deciding also what their intentionality was in their specific acts. So the other part is basically just a second designation, which is another country other than Philippines designates an organization as terrorist, so that automatically gets translated into being considered a terrorist group in Philippines as well. That has also been struck down because that will also require another process. So it's the process that the judges were more concerned about. They were not really concerned about the very egregious other parts of the law, which includes a 24-day warrantless detention, not just of people who are considered or suspected of terrorism, but also people who were caught with these suspects of terrorism or people associated with terrorism. And this pretty much includes any kind of civilian. So if this person is part of, like, say, a protest gathering or any kind of small gathering, they can be also arrested and held without any charge, without any warrant for 24 days for questioning. Now, other parts of the laws are also equally problematic. If you consider they took out any kind of reparation for people who will be falsely accused by officers and officials. And the law pretty much exists now. It has been almost sanctioned. Obviously, the legal process will go on. So for civil rights movement, it's just a small victory, considering the setback that it has actually brought up. They are still not happy with it. And the very existence of such a law makes it even more problematic for the political atmosphere, considering that elections are coming around the corner, and it's just like few months left for Duterte's regime. So you have to consider the fact that like whether or not the law allows it, the act of cracking down on dissent, act of cracking down on social movements, trade union movements, or even the extrajudicial killings that has become quite common under the Duterte administration, will continue because the act is seen as a certain kind of sanction from the state for these vigilante groups and extrajudicial groups. So it is going to be a big issue right now, and it is going to continue. The resistance is going to continue, nevertheless.
So what will be the impact on the resistance, and will we see any sort of immediate, positive outcomes?
Very difficult to say, because at this point, many of the groups are very worried that the Duterte administration might just take this judgment, this ruling, as a sort of sanction for the law, and that would mean that they will actually heighten their crackdown on activists and movements. And this is going to be a big problem for them, especially if they're trying to use some kind of propaganda vehicle or come up with something that can actually help them with the elections. So it can be an issue that we can see in the near future. A positive outcome, this is the most positive outcome we can think of right now, these reading down of some provisions. But other than that, some activists, I'm actually quoting some of them, have said, the deadly provisions are still there, the killer provisions are still there. And so we really do not know how it is going to be, unless there is a change in government or the political atmosphere in the coming elections, or for that matter, the court goes for a review of its own judgment. We can't really expect right now, in the immediate aftermath, any kind of better outcomes for social movements in Philippines.
All right, thanks for that. Stick around for the next story. Actually, we'll talk to you about that as well. It turns out that the Prime Minister of Finland is much like the rest of us. Sanna Marin has apologized to the public after going clubbing in Helsinki without considering that she'd been in close contact with a colleague who tested positive for COVID-19. She also, and this is something that I cannot relate to at all, left her work phone at home when she went out. But the UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson is a whole different kettle of fish. A party was held at his official residence, number 10 Downing Street, at a time when London was in Tier 3 restrictions, which banned all social events. The story was broken last week by the tabloid Daily Mirror, and multiple sources have since confirmed it. Anish, apparently dozens of people were at this party. There was some secret Santa situation and wine and cheese. So what's going on?
So it's, we shouldn't be exactly laughing at it, but it is kind of funny considering the fact that the Johnson administration was criticized for a very unscientific lockdown at the time. But at the same time, you have to remember there were raids on weddings at that point for hosting more than 40 people. And at this point, they had, at least that is the allegations that are coming from internal sources that the newspapers are breaking, which says that there was a very well-packed group of people, mostly people in the Johnson government and the entire administration of of 10 Downing Street and the government itself. So, and even some describers are quite colorful, considering like some of them have said it's a boozy party. So we really do not know what actually transpired. But since last December, this was something that happened last December. Since then, the government and its spokesperson and the ruling party's leadership have not denied that there was a party. And this is something that shows, they are not on record saying that there was no party. The most we had was very recently, in December 6th, this month, when the spokesperson said that there was not a party, if I'm not wrong. That's what the quote was. And that all the they insisted that the COVID protocols were followed. And it was immediately after that, pretty much the next day, that the video of them trying to rehearse for these questions and, joking about like there not being any party. And then at that point, they just slipped and said like no safety protocols were followed or there was no social distancing. and trying to just pass it off or joke it as a business meeting or a cheese and wine. It's a sort of disingenuous way of them trying to, if not cover up, but it's trying to save their asses.
Just
If I
brazen it out, I guess.
yeah, basically that. In a way, they are trying to just keep themselves away from it. Now the Johnson government, Prime Minister Johnson himself has actually said that he will be initiating an inquiry, and where that goes is yet to be seen. But it shows that there were two standards one for the people.
public and
Yeah,
one for
exactly, and that becomes quite apparent, and that is why the anger is so huge, because we have to understand that a large number of people, especially low-income groups, were quite badly affected by the lockdowns. They were not really that well compensated. They were also affected by the pandemic, despite we also know that the Johnson government took the lockdowns much later than many countries. They tried to go for a herd immunity at first, and it was quite unscientific how they handled the entire pandemic situation in the United Kingdom. So having gone through that, the public is quite angry, and very understandably so. And so if the situation is as what as papers claim, it is quite serious, considering that the government has taken it so lightly, especially when thousands of people have died in this.
And I would assume with all the pressure now, perhaps more events at 10 Downing Street will also come under
Scrutiny,
at least some scrutiny or investigation.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Anish. And finally, on this day in 1987, a popular uprising known as the First Intifada broke out as Palestinians rose in mass to protest the violence and abuse under Israeli military occupation and its policy of settler colonialism. Abdul is going to come in onto the show now. Abdul, if you will give us a brief history of the First Intifada.
Okay. Basically, this was an event which marks a shift in the Palestinian history, particularly post-1967. Before that, the Palestinian resistance movement was primarily organized by the people who were in exile in the refugee camps in Lebanon or in Jordan or in other parts of the West Asia and Europe. This was the first time when the resistance movement came home in the occupied territories of West Bank, Gaza and Eastern Jerusalem, where a large number of Palestinians started agitating, organizing themselves, coordinating their actions. It was a huge, you can say, a civil disobedience movement, a non-cooperation movement in which they refused to cooperate with the occupying authorities, Israel. And they demanded, of course, the independence of the Palestinian territories. And this was a very diverse set of movement, largely peaceful, where the people will gather in mass and raise their issues. And of course, but there were some elements which also took violent actions, like it was the period when Hamas was born. So this was a mix of both majorly non-violent movement, but also some kind of violent elements in it. And as I said before, the basic characteristic of the 1987 Palestinian Intifada was that it was for the first time that a large public action was taken within the occupied territories.
Right. And how do we see that legacy living on in the resistance movement today?
The Intifada, you can say, defines the Palestinian movement today. This was the reason that the Israel was forced to kind of start a negotiation with the Palestinians, the PLO, which culminated in now largely defunct Oslo peace agreements, which promised that within 5 years a new state, Palestinian state, will be formed. Because of the Intifada, you see, as I said, Hamas was born. Because of the Intifada, the Palestinians realized that the resistance from within is possible, which continues. In 2000, the second Intifada was largely inspired by what happened in 1987. Then you see, since then, the Palestinians have organized themselves within the occupied territories. And today, the Palestinian movement is largely within the occupied territories. So the shift from resistance from exile to resistance from within the occupied territories is basically the greatest legacy of the Palestinian First Intifada.
Okay, thanks, Abdul. And that's a wrap for the show today from Abdul, myself, and the entire People's Dispatch team. Thank you for watching. This has been Daily Debrief. You can get more on all these stories on our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and check us out on all the social media platforms. Thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow. Goodbye.